Good afternoon. I actually changed my presentation within hours of sitting here because I realized as the sixth speaker, everything has been said. We know that mobiles are very important. We know data is going to be critical. And I really have nothing much to say about the future because predicting it is such a difficult task, and my surname is not Nostradamus. So it's going to be difficult. Anyway, thank you for inviting me here. So I scribbled a few things which I thought I'd share with you, if it's all right with the rest of the audience. I'm going to ask you things and questions in between, because I don't know how many of you actually saw this thing on TED.com called The Hole in the Wall. Are there people who've watched The Hole in the Wall? Okay. It's by a gentleman called Sugata Mitra, and he said something very interesting. He went and put a computer in a village in India, in a remote village, where the children had never seen a computer. They didn't know a word of English, and he posed a very complex question to them on DNA in biology. In 8 months' time, when he went back to the place, he found that the children in the age group of 7 to 12 had figured out how to work the computer, and they had found the answer to the DNA question in English. They had obviously taught themselves. And he said, what's very important, therefore, is the role of teachers is not to teach, but to only ask questions, because people find the answers themselves. When we predict the future, it's a dangerous territory. In October 2008, after having spent about 17, 18 years in telecom business, I started telecom in India in 1994, launched the first mobile service. We prepared a very elaborate business plan in October 2008. And by November 2008, that very elaborate business plan was obsolete, because we didn't predict two things. First, there would be an economic recession. And the second, that there would be something called an iPhone. So that's how good we are. I found there's a gentleman from Microsoft, with apologies to him. Let me use Microsoft as an example. Today we know Microsoft operating systems work, and please don't forgive me for the statistics. Let us say Microsoft shares are about 60-odd%. What do you think the board of Microsoft is discussing about what Microsoft would be in 2020? Can we make that market share 80% or 85%? There could be a lot of debate. But who would be asking the question whether in 2020 there would be something called an operating system? So when we are talking about the future, there's a difference between forecasting the future and predicting the future. Most businesses are forecasting the future and not predicting it. In 1988, when I was looking after a particular commercial section of my company, I used to book a call on a fixed line phone in India to 24 different destinations to collect stock figures. And there was a possibility that my calls would mature in about 48 to 72 hours, which really meant that I didn't leave my telephone. Because if I did, I would go back to the end of the queue for another 72 hours. India's population in 1994 was about 950 million. And there were 25 million fixed line phones. 60% of them were in the big cities and with the government institutions and things like that. And today I wonder, how did we ever communicate? How did we catch up in the malls? How did we pick up children from school? How did we do anything? Today, India has 850 million phone connections. And I've seen this in my lifetime. When girls in middle-class homes in India were about 16 or 17 years old in the year 1994, their parents used to book two things. One was a cooking gas connection, and the other, a telephone connection, because they hoped by the time they were 21, they would have both, and they could take it as part of their trousseau. I'm sitting in the city of London with the majority of the people in this room coming from extremely developed economies. We've talked about everything that is to be done in terms of the future. We're wearing goggles, we're wearing glasses. There are 40 million people in India who travel 20 kilometers by foot to get potable drinking water. There's no electricity. So everything that the developed nations and the West has taken for granted is still an issue. But there's hope. There's hope because one of the famous Indian nuclear scientists said that when you're backward, you can catch up in real time. And that's what's happening to the developing nations today. All the speakers today have been absolutely outstanding, and it's a daunting task to add anything to what they said, but I endorse a number of things. But I'd also like to slightly contradict a few things, because I've actually run a telecom business for 20 years. The last company that I built is now about 140 million subscribers, which is Vodafone India. When you look at the commonalities, and we say that you can have McDonald's everywhere, Google everywhere, Yahoo everywhere. As advertising people, it's very important to understand the social context of nations. This new world of connectivity and the Internet of Things and everything else that we are talking about is a great opportunity, actually, to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Every time the sun shines on the world, the half of the world is in darkness. So it's very important for us to understand how social contexts happen. Why is it that, I know there are Japanese in this audience, but how is it that 1 million girls, schoolgirls every month follow something called Hello Kitty? Why is it that in Indonesia, you had phones like Blackberries being used by kids, and you had communicators where you couldn't do that in Malaysia? Why is it that Malaysia, which is a population of 28 million, ranks in the top 10 of the world's social networking sites, with the hundreds of countries being larger than them in population? Why does it happen? It's very important to understand, therefore, the context. Why is it that in Africa, one particular country has great success with M-Pesa, whereas all the other African countries don't? Why is it in the Philippines that SMS is so popular and it's not popular in the country next to it? So how do you apply universal rules? How do you take trends and make them common? Where do you find the difference in what people have to do? Somebody once told me that we don't even know what we are competing against. I think that was a very important thing that Damien said, that the competition is coming from all over today. It's an interesting story, and I don't know if it's true, but somebody in a confectionery company told me that they found out that schoolgirls used to use their particular chocolates. When they came back from school, they used to consume a lot of those chocolates. Suddenly, the consumption went down. So obviously, there was panic in the marketing department, and they went around looking for research to see which particular food group has replaced it. And this is something that was done in the early 80s. And they found that actually girls came back from school and were busy with SMS. Today, it's probably Facebook. So we thought that they thought that they were in the business of chocolates. They were actually in the business of passing time. If you go into the crowded trains of Bombay, where people commute in millions every day, the English expression is, sardines are better off. And if you raise your hand, you can't bring it down. Little kids actually sell peanuts in small packets. And you know what they call them? Buy 10 paise of time pass. So if you look at the dawn of mobile business in India, and I'll talk about India because that's something I'm familiar with, and it's a bit of a context to developing nations, is that the first thing that we did was freedom of movement. Because fixed line phones reach fixed line phones, mobile phones reach people. And that's the power of mobile computing. And like somebody said today, definitions are changing. We no longer talk about mobile phones, we talk about terminal devices because of something called a SIM card that can be put in anything. And like someone rightly said, and I remember having a conversation with the CEO of Ericsson, Hans Westberg, and he said to me, look, in 2020, we're going to have 50 billion mobile connections. And I said, my God, 7 billion people, 4.5 billion mobile penetration. Where are we going to get people from? Have we discovered people in Mars? It's because the chip is going to be everywhere. That's what's changing. It can be put anywhere. Everything is connected. And all the data can be collated and it can be brought together. Lots of interesting questions happen today about data. I sometimes wonder, being a telecom company, why do we do market research? Two things happen every day. Millions of consumers call our contact centers and give us feedback. We don't do anything about it. We have got the ability now with mobile phones to know what you are doing in every moment of your life. We have invaluable information. Every day, mobile companies sleep over tons and tons of incredible data. Is there anybody from IBM here? IBM has said something very interesting, saying all companies actually have a system of records. And that's not good enough. Damien talked about the collaboration between the CMO and the CTO. I think it was fantastic, and the CIO. I think it was a fantastic statement he made. IBM says you have to move from the system of records to the system of interaction and the system of engagement. The difference between companies turning data into insight and acting on insight is critical. So if you look back at the world of developing nations, I said we started from the freedom of movement. So now people all over the world have got an ability to connect to each other with mobile phones. The second thing is they started doing more things with their phones, and we started pumping entertainment to them. But the third part of where mobility is going to be important, and I'm being very careful with the words I'm choosing, where mobility is going to be important, is really in changing the social order. In England, in Europe, in America, we take health, education, security for granted. There are billions of people in this world who have none of these, even up to low standards. This is the new opportunity. And the good part is that this opportunity of advertising, marketing, and doing business is not restricted to these countries alone. Today, the expertise on online and data marketing is in this room. And I actually urge you all to step out. Years ago at a party, I met Olli-Pekka, who used to be, in those days, the CEO of Nokia. And he told me that when he was young, he asked his father after he graduated from university, said, "Dad, what should I do? Where should I go?" And in Finland, his dad pointed to the West, which was the United States of America. He said, "Go there." Olli-Pekka said, "My boy graduated from school from university in the UK, and he asked me the same question." And I said, "Go east." There are billions of people waiting to be connected. and their life to be changed. Let me give you a little peek into what I am doing today. In India today, out of a population of 1.2 billion people, there are only about 47 million laptops, about 20 million PCs, and about 5 million tablets. But as I speak, every quarter, 50 million smartphones are coming into the country. By the end of 2014, there will be 220 million, which is almost the size of Indonesia, million smart devices in the country. We are building a nationwide broadband network. Today, the average broadband that people have in India ranges from under 2 MB. And we are hoping to provide 50 million Indian households with at least 100 MB, going up to 1 GB. Now, what's the point of taking a bunch of starved people into a food warehouse? They'll suffer from indigestion. What are you giving them so much data for? It'll happen in phases. But I think what's more important is it's like opening out a football field and throwing in a few footballs, and people start playing their own games and matches. That's what we have learned from the world of internet. So as we look at the future of developing nations and the context of advertising, opportunity, and marketing, we must understand all the lessons we learned from the internet world. Most importantly, time has become asymmetric. It took some countries 200 years to knock off colonial rule. People twittered and toppled a government in 3 days. Time has become asymmetric. And therefore, people will catch up in real time. And that's the opportunity again for developing nations, to catch up in real time with what's happening in the rest of the world. Freemium is very important, as opposed to free. Understanding the logic of freemium. You have to lower the entry barriers. As we speak, we're looking at introducing a $20 4G phone in India. Because if it's not $20, you're not talking millions of people. We are talking about creating self-help. And that is where expertise from Europe and the US will be so critical, because for years and years, you know that Asians actually freeze talking to an automatic machine because they're not used to it. They need a face at the other end. Face is very important. But that's where the technology and the knowledge that exists here will be very, very critical for automation. There is a lot of population, but I'm not so sure there's a lot of skilled population. And when you talk about things like economic recession, they hit countries in the Asian region a lot less than others, because these countries are fundamentally short of infrastructure. And as long as you're going to build infrastructure, it's a kind of an insurance you have against recession, because you're always building. So it's a very interesting mix. So when you look at different countries, you look at their backgrounds, the social context, you see how technology is moving. It's a fantastic opportunity. And technology is creating a process of what I call creative disruption. But it has to be harnessed in a manner, and what is most important, and that's my large view to this group, is with all that we are doing about new technology, glasses, and I really loved Eric's views on things, and I hope I can find some time to talk to you privately, because a lot of things that you said are so relevant to us today, is that the most important task of technology is to make us human. Nobody knew, and Steve Jobs told all of us, that people don't know what technology can do for them. We always thought customer was king. Whoever knew that if you did this, you could expand a screen, if you did this, you could take it out. These are human actions. The difference of what technology can do for people will lie not in what we do with people who are familiar with computers and who are geeks, but what we call the digital immigrants, the digitally deprived. The next phase of the change in the world will actually come in with how we change the lives of the digital immigrants and the digital have-nots. The guys who are consuming geeks and who sort of are the early adopters will always find technology. You don't have to do anything for them. They're in the football field, they know what to do. But how do you bring a whole lot of disconnected people into the real world? And our test of time will really be our opportunity to unleash that potential. These are people who for years have been deprived because of the brick and mortar model. But today it's the day of David and Goliath. You don't need television commercials, you don't need full-page ads in newspapers. You can do a homemade video on the YouTube and it runs viral. The consumer is now king. Power has shifted. Let me give you a romantic example. In an average Indian village, a small farmer who's got a small plot of land and probably grows tomatoes picks up his basket in the morning, and around every 20 or 30 villages there's a small market, which in India is called a mandi. So he goes to the mandi and he walks about 15 kilometers and he waits at the mandi to sell his tomatoes. And the so-called proverbial evil wholesaler makes him wait. As the sun starts getting warmer, his tomatoes are beginning to rot. His prices are falling. And out of distress, he sells it at half the price because he's got to feed his family that day. This doesn't happen every day. It is something that his grandfather did all his life, his father did all his life, and he's going to do all his life. But it's changing. Today, he sits in his house and he calls up all the mandis around the place and sells his tomatoes to the guy who bids the highest price. That's consumer shift. That's what technology has done. We all need to deeply understand that, because that is what is going to change the world in the future. And we can't throw words at it like big data, analytics, etc. We have to understand the purpose. I like what Mark said. I don't know Mark's gone. He said the big important thing about data is why do you need it in the first place? And what will you do with it? So it's a very interesting juncture that we are all in. And I worked for a few years in Malaysia. And it's amazing to see how Malaysia is such an important social networking nation. And to imagine that 6 years ago, there was no such thing called social networking. Anyway, I would round off by saying that, adversity will create creativity for people as we go along. And I just want you to say that the small developing nations have only one thing in their mind. And this is one thing that I picked up years ago when I was just about 10, and it was spoken by the president of a very small country called Mauritius, Sir Sivsagar Ramgoolam, who's no longer alive. He said, in a very spirited way, and that's the spirit of today's world of developing nations, he's saying, think not of the heights that we have reached, but consider the depths from which we have risen. The impossible we are doing right away. It's only the miracles that will take a little longer. Thank you.